All right, so today we're going to dive into something pretty big, a Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah.
It's about the Trump administration trying to deport Venezuelan immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
And, we want to make sure everyone listening can really get what happened, why it matters, and, all the different opinions, like even within the Supreme Court.
Right.
And we really want to do this, without getting lost in all that super technical legal stuff.
Of course, yeah.
So no jargon. Just the good stuff. And the good stuff for today comes from a YouTube analysis by Glenn Kirshner and a report in the New York Times.
Sounds good.
So we're using those to kind of like make this a shortcut so you can be, up to speed quickly.
Exactly. And, one thing that really stands out from both of those sources is this kind of like a point of tension, right?
Yeah.
All 9 justices on the court.
Oh, wow.
They all agreed on a really fundamental thing.
Okay.
The right to due process for these immigrants.
Right.
But then they were totally split. When it came down to the details, like, okay, what are the specific procedures involved?
Yeah.
And what happens right now to the people who are facing deportation?
That's so interesting. So it's like they agree on the big idea, but then when you get into the nitty gritty, it's like, whoa.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so let's start with the part where they all agree. It seems like a really big deal. That all 9 justices, like regardless of how they usually lean.
Right.
They all said, yeah, these Venezuelan immigrants and basically anyone facing deportation, they have a right to due process.
Absolutely.
That's huge.
Yeah. And both the YouTube analysis and the New York Times, they really highlight this.
Okay.
That all 9 justices confirmed it. Like these individuals, they have this right guaranteed by the Constitution. Like you can't deport them without due process.
And what exactly does that include? Like what are the specifics?
So the core rights here are like first being informed, right? They have to know what the government is trying to do to them.
Yeah.
And then second, the chance to be heard.
Yeah.
To go to court, present their case to a judge, all of that.
Okay, so like a fair shot.
Exactly.
I remember in Glenn Kirshner's analysis on YouTube, he used some pretty strong language about this. He called it a strong rebuke, even a unanimous rebuke of what the Trump administration was doing.
Right. And I think that's important because it really shows you this is coming from the highest court in the land. And it's like a really clear message.
Okay, so we've got this bedrock principle.
Yeah.
Even if you're not a citizen,
right?
If you're here in the U.S., you have these basic protections.
Exactly. It's like a fundamental part of our legal system.
Yeah.
And this agreement, it's like the foundation, right? To understand where the court then went, like where they diverged.
And that's where this 5-4 split comes in.
Exactly.
The reports and analysis really hone in on this division.
Yeah, so what was the main disagreement there?
Yeah.
It all came down to procedure.
Okay, tell me more about that. Like, what was the specific sticking point?
So it was 5 justices, right? Chief Justice Roberts, and then Justices Alito, Gorsuch, Thomas, and Kavanaugh.
Okay. That's the majority then.
Right. And they basically said the Venezuelan immigrants' lawyers, they filed the lawsuit in the wrong court.
What?
Seriously? Yeah. They were like, nope, you should have filed this in Texas, not D.C.
Because that's where they were being detained.
Exactly. And maybe they even suggested like, hey, maybe you should have used a different type of legal challenge altogether.
That's kind of frustrating, isn't it? Like almost a technicality.
Yeah, some people saw it that way.
I remember the YouTube analysis mentioned something about how brief the majority opinion was.
Oh, yeah.
Like super short.
There's only 4 paragraphs, right?
Yeah, and it didn't really get into like the deeper issues.
Right, like the allegations about violating the Constitution or what this actually meant for the people involved.
Exactly.
And that became a major point of, like back and forth.
Yeah.
Because the dissenting justices, oh man, they did not hold back.
What did they say?
Well, according to the reports, they went so far as to call the majority opinion heartless and soulless.
Wow.
Strong words, right?
Yeah, and it shows you that there's this real tension between sticking to the rules and thinking about what happens to actual people because of these legal decisions.
Right.
So what's fascinating here is that we're seeing 2 totally different things being prioritized.
Exactly, and that's what makes this case so interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about those dissenting justices.
Yeah.
We've got Sotomayor, Kagan, Jackson, and Justice Barrett join them for part of it. It seems like they were really trying to shine a light on the potential constitutional violations.
They were, yeah.
And the human side of all this.
Absolutely. The dissent it really gave a voice to what they saw as like blatant constitutional violations.
Okay.
And all the suffering that came from what the Trump administration was doing.
And Justice Sotomayor, she specifically mentioned something that happened just 3 weeks before this ruling.
Oh, yeah. That detail really sticks with you.
What was it again?
So she pointed out that the government started transferring scores of Venezuelan immigrants to a prison in El Salvador, like without any due process at all.
That's heavy stuff.
It is. And it really shows you the urgency and just how high the stakes were for these people.
And it makes you understand why the dissenting justices were so fired up.
Right.
So we've talked about the court, but the government actually made some pretty big admissions during all this too, didn't they?
Yeah, this is key.
What exactly did they acknowledge?
Okay, so through the Department of Justice, the government now says explicitly that people facing removal under the Alien Enemies Act, they have a right to judicial review.
So basically a right to have their case looked at by a court.
Exactly.
And that's a pretty significant shift, right? Especially when you think about what we heard earlier about what the government was allegedly doing.
Totally. Like rushing immigrants onto planes without letting them even talk to a lawyer.
Yeah, or have a hearing.
Yeah. And the dissent really highlights that contrast, right?
Right.
Like, okay, now you're saying they have these rights, but before you were acting like they didn't exist.
So it raises a really important question about how these rights are actually put into practice.
Absolutely.
And whether what the government was doing before really matched up with what they're saying now.
Yeah, like, did they actually respect these rights?
Big questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was the actual order from the Supreme Court? What did they tell the government to do about these deportations?
All right, so according to the analysis, the order is really clear. It says that anyone detained and facing removal under this Alien Enemies Act, they get judicial review.
Okay.
And that review can look at a few things, like how is this act being interpreted? Is it even constitutional?
Yeah.
And does this person, do they actually fit the definition of an alien enemy?
That makes sense.
And importantly, all 9 justices, even with their disagreements, they agreed on something crucial. The government has to give notice.
Okay.
Like, hey, we're going to remove you. And they have to do this within a reasonable time.
Okay.
So that the person has a chance to fight back, legally.
Yeah.
They can seek something called habeas relief.
What's that?
It's basically a way to challenge your detention in court.
Oh, I see.
And this has to happen in the right court, too.
Okay.
But here's the big thing. This all has to happen before the person is removed.
So it's not like a we'll deal with it later kind of thing.
Exactly. And the dissent was super focused on this.
Yeah.
Like they were sending a warning to the government, like, hey, you can't just go back to doing things the way you were before.
Right. Like doing these removals in secret or whatever.
Yeah. Any attempt to remove people without this proper notice and a real chance to challenge it in court, that would be like directly going against what the Supreme Court just said.
So a very strong warning. And it sets up a clear expectation from the court. And then the dissenting opinion, it ends with some really powerful words, right?
It does.
Like a mic drop moment.
Yeah, it's a pretty striking way to end their argument.
Do you remember the exact wording?
Yeah, so they said, the government's conduct in this litigation poses an extraordinary threat to the rule of law that a majority of this court now rewards the government for its behavior with discretionary equitable relief is indefensible. We as a nation and a court of law should be better than this.
Wow. They did not mince words.
Nope.
So, to recap, what did our deep dive uncover? We've got this unanimous agreement from all 9 justices.
Right.
They all agree that these Venezuelan immigrants facing deportation, they have a fundamental right to due process.
Exactly.
But then there's this 5-4 split on a pretty specific procedural issue, like where the lawsuit should have been filed. And the dissenting justices, they were really critical of what the Trump administration was doing.
Yeah, they didn't like it.
They emphasized the potential constitutional violations and the human impact.
Right. Like what this actually meant for people.
Yeah.
And then the government itself, they officially acknowledged the right to judicial review and notice in these cases.
So that's a big development.
It is.
It is.
It's really interesting, right? Like the key takeaway here is this reaffirmation of due process. It's like a cornerstone of our legal system.
Absolutely.
And it applies even in really tricky situations like national security and immigration.
Right. But then you have this split decision. And it shows you there are 2 really different ways of thinking about the law, even within the court.
Right.
So the majority, they were all about the rules.
Yeah.
Like jurisdiction, where you file a lawsuit, that's got to be right. Maybe they thought that was the most important thing.
Could be.
To keep the system functioning properly.
Yeah.
But then you've got the dissent.
Right.
They were all about protecting individual rights, like right now.
Yeah.
And to them, following procedure that was less important than preventing potential constitutional violations.
Yeah. Or stopping people from suffering.
So two really different approaches.
For sure.
So as you're listening to this, think about it.
Yeah.
We all agree due process is important, right? But this ruling, with its split decision,
right,
what does it tell us about how easy it is for vulnerable populations to actually access and use their rights?
That's the question.
And what does all this make you think about the Supreme Court? What's their role in all this?
Yeah.
How do they balance national security concerns with basic liberties?
Big stuff.
And how do they make sure that these procedural rulings, they don't accidentally undermine people's fundamental rights?
A lot to think about.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's food for thought, for sure.
It is.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.
See ya.